To date, close to 7,000 different people have scaled Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world. But there is one mountain thousands of meters shorter and not even in the top 100 highest peaks in the world that no one dares to climb. Not even the most experienced mountaineers. That mountain is Mount Kailash. In the late 20th century, a group of Siberian mountaineers attempted to summit this mountain. This was just a few decades after another group of mountaineers had attempted the same feat, but ended up vanishing without a trace. Hours into the climbing, each of the climbers made a shocking discovery. They had started to age, very rapidly. Their hair and fingernails had grown out significantly, making them look like they'd been living on the mountain for a few weeks, rather than just climbing for a few hours. Not even anywhere close to the peak of the mountain, the climbers decided to abandon the expedition and go back to their normal lives. Unknown to them, normal went out the door the day they decided to climb Mount Kailash. Barely 1 year after their climbing attempt, every single one of the climbers who went on that expedition died. And while that is mysterious enough on its own, the conditions under which all of the climbers died turn out to be even more strange. The climbers, who were all young men at the time of the climb, died of old age, which suggests that the mountain had caused them to age by decades in just 1 year. Experts who have been looking into this mountain say that this may not even be a mountain at all, citing its near-perfect sides. They say it might actually be a man-made pyramid built by an ancient but technologically advanced civilization. Some would conclude this race to be divine. Others would insist that they are extraterrestrial. For several days, I scoured the internet, reading, watching, and listening intently to literally everything I could find about Mount Kailash. The result of my findings? A lot more questions than answers. This is probably the most mysterious geological phenomenon to ever exist. Chapter 1. The Mystery of Mount Kailash. Mount Kailash, also known as Kailash Parvat, or the Stairway to Heaven, is located in the southwest corner of Tibet. For many centuries now, this mountain has captivated the collective imagination of the entire human race for many mysterious reasons. And the fact that the mountain sits on the border between China and India isn't even one of them. The mountain also seems to have a thing with the number 4. For context, 4 religions lay claim to Mount Kailash as a holy site: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and the Bon religion. But more on this later. Secondly, 4 rivers flow out of Kailash, and each of these rivers flows in the direction of each of the 4 cardinal points. First is the Indus River, which flows north. Then we have the Sutlej, which flows west. Third is the Brahmaputra, which flows east. And then we have the Karnali River, which flows south. But even that isn't where things start to get strange. Let's talk about the appearance of this so-called mountain. Judging by looks alone, Mount Kailash hardly looks like a mountain. Now, to be clear, Mount Kailash isn't the only mountain that takes the shape of a pyramid. There are many other pyramidal peaks in the world, like Pyramid Mountain in Alberta, Alpamayo in Peru, Muratov Peak in Bulgaria, and several others. However, as you can see, all of these other mountains have the imperfections you'd expect from a naturally occurring landform. Mount Kailash, on the other hand, does not. Its sides are almost perfectly perpendicular, almost like someone intentionally designed and constructed the mountain that way. This gives Kailash a highly symmetrical look, with each slope aligning to each of the 4 cardinal points. And this brings me to my next point. Each of the 4 faces of Mount Kailash is reported to have different colors. The north face is said to be the color of gold. The south face is lapis lazuli. The east face is the color of crystal. And the west face is the color of ruby. Speaking of faces, the northern slopes of Mount Kailash always have far less snow than its southern slopes. Now, that doesn't immediately strike you as odd until you realize that in the northern hemisphere of the Earth, the south side typically gets more sunlight than the north side. This means that, naturally speaking, the north face of Mount Kailash should have far more snow than the south side, since it receives less sunlight. But once again, Mount Kailash bends the law of nature, and its northern slope experiences relatively little snow in comparison to the south face that gets more sunlight and still manages to welcome glaciers and snowfall all year round. As if this isn't weird enough, there's also the very strange magnetic force field on Mount Kailash. On a good day, finding your bearing with a compass is a pretty simple task, since the Earth's magnetic field is as straightforward as a bar magnet with a North Pole and a South Pole. On Mount Kailash, however, that law seems to break entirely. People who have tried using a compass at Mount Kailash have found that it never works. The needles just keep spinning and never end up pointing north. Mount Kailash also has zero plant life, which is highly unusual. Mountains always have trees and plants growing out from their fissures. But strangely, on Mount Kailash, not even one plant can be found. It's completely barren. Now, here's where things go from weird to, quote, too coincidental to be random, unquote. The south face of Mount Kailash seems to come with a swastika inscribed on it. No one knows if this was inscribed by someone or if it was the result of natural activity. All we know for sure is that when the sun sets on the south side of Mount Kailash, the massive vertical ice cracks and horizontal strata of the rock form a shadow of a left-facing swastika, which, interestingly, is considered an auspicious sign for all four religions that consider Mount Kailash sacred. Amazed? Well, things get even weirder, because the swastika isn't the only ancient religious symbol inscribed on Mount Kailash. According to satellite views of the mountain, the face of Hindu deity, Lord Shiva, appears on Mount Kailash. Also, the snow on the peak of this mountain takes the shape of Om, which is considered the greatest and most sacred syllable of all the mantras in Hinduism. Things are definitely no less mysterious on the geographical side of things. Mount Kailash is popularly known within geographical circles as the navel of the earth. This is because the mountain sits exactly at the very center of the planet, or the axis mundi, as some religions call it. From this position, Mount Kailash maintains an eerily consistent distance from major structures around the world. For instance, Kailash is 6,666 kilometers away from Stonehenge, as well as the North Pole and the South Pole. Not weird enough for you? Well, Mount Kailash is also 13,332 kilometers from base to peak. That's 6,666 kilometers times 2. On top of that, Mount Kailash has these two lakes which bend the laws of science just as well as Kailash itself does. The two lakes are known as Mansarovar and Rakshastal, and from their characteristics today, you'd hardly believe that these two used to be the same body of water before they became separated due to tectonic activity. On the one hand is Mansarovar. It's a freshwater lake, round like the sun and boasting aquatic life. But here's where things get interesting. Mansarovar is the highest freshwater lake in the world. However, even at its altitude, the lake never freezes over, no matter the time of the year. The lake also never moves, regardless of what extreme weather condition hits the area. Rakshastal, on the other hand, is completely different. Also called the Demon Lake, Rakshastal is shaped like the crescent moon, extremely salty, does not support life, and is quite turbulent compared to the Mansarovar. On top of that, locals claim that the Rakshastal periodically vanishes, leaving behind parched ground, only to mysteriously reappear at full volume later, like it never left in the first place. This is why some people refer to the lake as the Ghost Lake. However, none of these features of Mount Kailash are as bewildering or as terrifying as the experiences people have had trying to climb this mountain. Besides the horror story of the Siberian climbers, who died of old age after climbing Mount Kailash, There are other less terrifying but still unexplainable encounters that climbers have recorded on this mountain. In fact, except you're a hardened cynic, you'd probably be, at least, open to the idea that there's something or someone on this mountain who does not want anyone climbing it. Climbers have reported finding themselves suddenly going back the same way they came while trying to get to the peak of the mountain, almost like the mountain changed position as they climbed. Others were forced down by sudden, unexplained blizzards or rainstorms from nowhere, while some simply felt a mysterious wave of illness that made it impossible for them to continue. Colonel Wilson, one of the many mountaineers who tried to scale the summit of Mount Kailash, said, "Just when I discovered an easy walk to the summit of the mountain, heavy snow began to fall, making the ascent impossible." Sergei Chistyakov's experience was even far worse. In the words of the Russian climber, "When we approached the foot of the mountain, my heart was pounding. I was in front of the sacred mountain, which has never been beaten. I felt extremely emaciated, and suddenly I was captivated by the thought that I do not belong on this mountain, that I must necessarily come back. As soon